Diogenes the Greek. The remarkable story of a great philosopher. Diogenes of Sinope was not your typical philosopher. He didn't write elaborate treatises, lecture in grand halls, or wear the robes of an intellectual. Instead, he wandered the streets of Athens, living in a barrel, mocking social norms, and using his wit to expose the absurdities of human nature. If you're looking for a thinker who radically changed the way people viewed life, wealth, and morality, then Diogenes is your man. But why should we care about Diogenes today? What makes his life and philosophy relevant in a world dominated by technology, materialism, and the constant search for success? To answer that, we must first understand the world Diogenes was born into and how he became one of the most influential figures in ancient philosophy. First of all, Diogenes was born in Sinope, a Greek colony on the coast of modern-day Turkey, around 412 or 404 BCE. During this time, Greece was a hotbed of intellectual thought. Great minds like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were shaping Western philosophy. But Diogenes wasn't interested in following their footsteps. In fact, he saw most of these intellectual pursuits as distractions from what really mattered: living a life of simplicity and virtue. Now, imagine Diogenes walking through Athens with minimal possessions, juxtaposed with lavish Greek citizens. Diogenes became known as the most famous practitioner of cynicism, a philosophy that encouraged living in accordance with nature, rejecting unnecessary material possessions, and being free from societal expectations. While cynicism was founded by Diogenes, Diogenes took these ideas to a radical extreme. For him, virtue wasn't about engaging in philosophical debate or seeking knowledge for knowledge's sake. It was about action, a way of life that embraced simplicity and mocked the hypocrisy of the elite. But Diogenes didn't just philosophize from the sidelines. He actively engaged with society, exposing its flaws with biting satire and sometimes shocking behavior. One of his most famous moments came when he met the young Alexander the Greek. As the story goes, Alexander, impressed with Diogenes, approached him and said, "Ask me for anything, and I will give it to you." Without hesitation, Diogenes replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." It was a response that perfectly captured his philosophy. Power, wealth, and status meant nothing compared to the simple joys of life. But going even further, I've come upon a very interesting explanation that said that Diogenes actually used a Greek word that meant unshadow me. So put away the shadow of ignorance and everything that I don't know and everything bad from my life. And Alexander knew at that moment that he couldn't do that. So that's why he was so really impressed. And then he said to Alexander said, "If I were to be born again and I couldn't be Alexander, I would be Diogenes." And Diogenes replied to him, "If I were not born Diogenes, I would still be like to be born Diogenes." And that's very funny. And now, early life and exile. To understand how Diogenes became the icon of cynicism, we need to explore his early years. Born in Sinope, Diogenes was the son of a wealthy banker, hight Theseus, but unlike most philosophers of his time, Diogenes' path wasn't paved by formal education or intellectual ambition. His journey towards cynicism actually began with a scandal. Diogenes' father was accused of debasing the currency of Sinope. Some stories suggest that Diogenes was involved in this crime, which led to his exile from the city. Whether guilty or not, Diogenes left his comfortable life behind and found himself in Athens, far from the wealth and prestige he had once known. It was here, in the heart of the intellectual world, that Diogenes began to reshape his entire view of life. Upon arriving in Athens, Diogenes sought out Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates and the founder of cynicism. However, their first encounter was far from friendly. Antisthenes, preferring solitude, tried to drive Diogenes away. Diogenes, undeterred by the hostility, reportedly told Antisthenes that no stick was hard enough to keep him away from the pursuit of virtue. This persistence impressed Antisthenes, and he eventually took Diogenes under his wing. Now, imagine Diogenes following Antisthenes to the streets of Athens, with Antisthenes attempting to drive him away with a stick, and Diogenes replying that clever sentence. Under Antisthenes' guide, Diogenes adopted the core principle of cynicism: self-sufficiency, rejection of societal norms, and the belief that virtue is the only true good. But while Antisthenes advocated for these ideas, it was Diogenes who embodied them to their fullest extreme. Now, imagine Athens at that time. And Athens was a city of wealth, culture, and philosophical debate. Yet Diogenes saw in it the seeds of moral decay. People were consumed by greed, vanity, and the relentless pursuit of pleasure. To him, this obsession with external wealth and power was foolish. True happiness, he believed, could only come from living in harmony with nature, free from the trappings of materialism. It was this mindset that led Diogenes to live in absolute poverty. Unlike other philosophers who lived in comfort while teaching about virtue, Diogenes chose to practice what he preached. He famously gave up all his possessions, living in a large ceramic jar, often mistakenly referred to as a barrel. His way of life wasn't just a reflection of poverty and the rejection of material wealth, but also a deliberate challenge to societal conventions. By living in the streets, eating scraps, and sleeping wherever he could, Diogenes sought to prove that happiness and virtue weren't tied to external comforts. In one story, Diogenes was said to have seen a young boy drinking water from his hands. Realizing that even a cup was an unnecessary luxury, Diogenes threw away the cup he had been carrying, exclaiming, "A child has beaten me in simplicity." Yet, despite his lifestyle, Diogenes didn't retreat from society. In fact, he frequently engaged with the people of Athens, often using humor and provocation to make his points. He wandered the marketplace with a lantern in broad daylight, telling people he was searching for an honest man. It was a satirical statement on the corruption and hypocrisy he saw around him. But Diogenes wasn't just a solitary philosopher criticizing from the sidelines. He believed that by exposing the absurdity of social conventions and luxuries, he could help others find freedom. For Diogenes, freedom wasn't the ability to amass wealth or power. It was the ability to live according to nature, free from the opinions and judgments of others. His exile from Sinope may have been the best thing that ever happened to him. It was in Athens, stripped of all his wealth and status, that Diogenes truly discovered what it meant to live a life of virtue. Cynicism, the philosophy. Diogenes' lifestyle wasn't a product of eccentricity for its own sake. It was a radical embodiment of the cynic philosophy. Cynicism, derived from the Greek word kynikos, meaning dog-like, aimed to strip away the artificial layers of society and return to what was truly natural. But what exactly did this philosophy entail, and why did Diogenes take it to such extremes? Imagine for a moment a marketplace full of people going around the business, and see a philosopher in the background, walking around barefoot, carrying only his cloak and staff. And this was Diogenes. At the core of cynicism was the belief that human happiness and fulfillment didn't depend on external goods, wealth, or status, but on living a life of virtue. For Diogenes, virtue wasn't something theoretical, discussed in the safety of an academic classroom. It was something lived, daily, relentlessly, and in the face of social scorn. He rejected all unnecessary desires, striving from luxury and going towards complete autarkia or self-sufficiency. Imagine now Diogenes observing wealthy Athenians indulging in food and luxuries while he contentedly eats simple food in the street. Diogenes and the Cynics believed that civilization has corrupted humanity. According to them, the pursuit of wealth, comfort, and honor had drawn people away from their true nature. Humans, like animals, should live in accordance with their natural instincts. But while animals were satisfied with food, water, and shelter, humans were trapped by endless desires for money, for fame, and for power. And now imagine Diogenes watching a stray dog lying contentedly in the sun, and then a wealthy man hurriedly rushing by with his servants. And the question is, who is the better one? Who had it better? Diogenes saw these desires as chains, binding people to a life of dependence and worry. He, on the other hand, sought freedom, the freedom to live with only what was necessary. In one famous story, Diogenes observed people rushing about, constantly busy. When someone asked him why he wasn't working like everyone else, Diogenes simply replied, "Why should I? I can live without needing to." For Diogenes, the ultimate freedom was the ability to detach oneself from the expectations and desires society imposed. Now imagine Diogenes calmly reclining in his drawers as Athenians rush around with their daily tasks. Cynicism also took aim at social conventions and the artificial nature of many human customs. Diogenes often mocked the absurdity of laws, traditions, and politeness. He saw these as barriers to true human freedom. One story tells of Diogenes attending a lavish banquet where he began to insult the guests, criticizing their indulgence. When someone chastised him, saying that people attend banquets to behave, not to insult, Diogenes retorted, "And I attend banquets to insult, not to behave." While some saw Diogenes as rude or antisocial, he was actually trying to help people break free from what he believed were the self-imposed chains of society. For him, living naturally meant being honest and direct. In another famous anecdote Diogenes urinated on a critic who insulted him, further cementing his reputation for shocking and scandalous behavior. Diogenes' extreme rejection of social norms was particularly evident in his disdain for wealth. He viewed money as the root of most human problems. He once visited the wealthy house of a man in Athens, and noticing the rich furnishings, Diogenes spat on the floor. When confronted, he explained, "I spit on the most worthless thing I could find in this house." His minimalism wasn't just a personal choice. It was a direct critique of the materialism of the world around him. Diogenes believed that the obsession with wealth and possessions distracted people from the simple pleasures of life and from the pursuit of virtue. But cynicism wasn't just about rejecting material wealth. It was about rejecting social approval altogether. Diogenes believed that the desire for status and the fear of shame were among the greatest barriers to human freedom. He often demonstrated this by engaging in behaviors that shocked or embarrassed others, but left him completely unfazed. One story tells of Diogenes masturbating in the marketplace. When confronted about this, he responded, "If only it were as easy to relieve hunger by rubbing my stomach." For Diogenes, shame was a construct, a product of society's expectations. By engaging in these acts publicly, he sought to show that natural human needs, whether hunger, thirst, or even other desires, should not be a source of shame. Now imagine Diogenes walking on the street at Athens, doing what he wants to do, unchained, surrounded by shocked Athenians as he carries on without concern. Diogenes didn't believe in a perfect theoretical world of ideas like Plato did. In fact, he openly mocked Plato's philosophical musings. During one of Plato's lectures, Diogenes heard the philosopher define a man as a featherless biped. The next day, Diogenes walked into Plato's academy with a plucked chicken and declared, "Here, this is Plato's man." This gesture was not just a clever prank. It was Diogenes' way of rejecting the abstract theoretical nature of much of Greek philosophy. For him, philosophy was a practical, lived experience. While many dismissed Diogenes as a madman or a provocateur, his philosophy was deeply rooted in a desire to live authentically. He believed that most people were enslaved by the opinions of others, constantly seeking approval or fearing judgment. Diogenes' entire life was a rejection of this need for validation. For him, the key to happiness was found in freedom from desire, freedom from social expectations, and living in accordance with nature. While Diogenes' philosophy was radical, it was his lifestyle that set him apart from other philosophers. In a world where philosophers like Plato and Aristotle lived comfortably, Diogenes took the path of extreme asceticism. He believed that to live virtuously, one needed to embrace simplicity, self-sufficiency, and a total rejection of societal norms. But what did that look like in practice? One of the most famous aspects of Diogenes' life was his decision to live in a large ceramic jar. This jar became his home in the heart of Athens. It symbolized his rejection of materialism and his desire to live as simply as possible. Where others saw wealth and luxury as the path to happiness, Diogenes found contentment in having nothing but the bare essentials. Diogenes' daily life was a testament to his belief that happiness comes from living in harmony with nature, free from the burdens of possessions and status. While others were busy pursuing careers, wealth, and social standing, Diogenes spent his days walking the streets of Athens, engaging in philosophical discussions and mocking the pretensions of the people around him. In one famous story, Diogenes was seen begging from a statue. When asked why he was doing this, he responded, "I am practicing disappointment and rejection," because the statue couldn't respond to him, and it was always a no. For Diogenes, life was full of rejection and disappointment, so he chose to prepare himself by confronting it head on. This was one of his many ways of training his mind to remain indifferent to external circumstances. Diogenes' complete indifference to wealth and luxury was evident in his famous encounter with the Athenian aristocracy. On one occasion, a wealthy man invited Diogenes to his mansion, hoping to impress the philosopher with his riches. As Diogenes entered, he noticed the floor was covered in fine carpets. But the man said, "You cannot spit anywhere because everything is so worthwhile." But Diogenes, when the tour was over, he spat on his face, on the face of the host. And he looked shocked and asked why did he do that, and said that everything was so much valuable that only his face was the least valuable thing around there. Diogenes' rejection of material wealth was matched only by his disdain for social conventions. He saw the customs and etiquette of his time as artificial constraints that kept people from living freely. One of the most striking examples of this came from his famous search for an honest man. In broad daylight, Diogenes walked the street of Athens, carrying a lantern, examining the faces of everyone he passed. When asked why he was doing this, Diogenes replied, "I am looking for an honest man." It was his way of pointing out the corruption and dishonesty that permeated society. Diogenes' ability to disregard authority and power stemmed from his belief that external power was illusory. True power, he believed, came from within, from the ability to live in accordance with nature and to remain unaffected by the opinions and judgments of others. This disregard for social status led to another famous incident. When asked what wine he liked best, Diogenes replied, "That which belongs to another." His point wasn't just to be provocative, it was a criticism of how people became attached to objects and luxuries that had no real value. Diogenes was also known for his direct approach to teaching and interacting with others. In one story, a young man approached Diogenes, asking for wisdom. Rather than offer a long explanation, Diogenes handed him a fish. The confused young man walked away, but when he returned, Diogenes scolded him, saying, "Just as this fish has made you come back, so will all material possessions lead you back to the world of desire and dependency." This was Diogenes' way of showing that attachments to objects and desires lead to dependence. Diogenes' lifestyle was not just a rejection of wealth, but of all unnecessary conventions, including the need for shelter, clothing, and even basic social manners. In another famous incident, Diogenes was seen eating in the marketplace, something considered improper in Greek society. When criticized for it, Diogenes responded, "If eating in a house is not shameful, then eating in public should not be either." For Diogenes, the distinctions people made between public and private, or between acceptable and unacceptable behavior, were artificial. He believed that a truly free person should feel no shame in fulfilling their basic needs, no matter the setting. Though he lived in poverty and often shocked the people around him with his unconventional behavior, Diogenes' life was guided by a deep sense of purpose. He believed that by stripping away the unnecessary layers of society, he could find a deeper truth about what it meant to live well. For Diogenes, true happiness wasn't found in luxury or approval. It was found in freedom from desire, in living simply, and in embracing the natural order of life. Encounters with prominent figures. Diogenes wasn't just a solitary philosopher living out his principles in the streets of Athens. His sharp wit and extreme views often brought him into contact with some of the most influential figures of his time, and these encounters would become legendary. Through these interactions, Diogenes not only tested his philosophy, but also critiqued the people in power, the intellectuals of his day, and the wealthy elite. The most interesting one was that of Alexander, and it was very, very interesting. I have told it before. Yes, I will tell you maybe again. So the story goes that Alexander visited Diogenes while he was resting in Corinth. Standing over him, Alexander, curious about the philosopher's reputation, offered Diogenes anything he desired. Most people would have asked for riches or favors, but Diogenes, in his typical fashion, responded simply, stand out of my sunlight, or, as the story goes, and shadow me. This bold statement epitomized Diogenes' philosophy. Not even the greatest power in the world could offer him something he valued more than anything. On one hand, it could be the simple pleasure of life, in this case the warmth of the sun, or on the other hand, wisdom, which he said to unshadow him, so to give him the most and biggest treasure of all, the philosophy and wisdom. Despite his brusque dismissal, Alexander was reportedly impressed. It said that he remarked, if I were not Alexander, I wish to be Diogenes. This interaction, brief as it was, illustrates the profound contrast between Diogenes' view of life and that of the world's most powerful rulers. Diogenes didn't care about power, wealth, or conquest. His only concern was living in accordance with nature. So, he was living with purpose. That's important. But Diogenes didn't reserve his criticism for kings alone. One of his most frequent targets was the philosopher Plato, whose grand ideas and abstract theories Diogenes found ridiculous. In one famous instance, Plato defined a human being as a featherless biped. Hearing this, Diogenes brought the plucked chicken and said, here is Plato's man. But Plato, of course, didn't take the insult lying down. He modified his definition to include with broad nails, but the point had already been made. For Diogenes, philosophy wasn't something to be debated in ivory towers or reduced to clever definitions. It was something lived, experienced, and acted out in the real world. Plato's metaphysical discussions, Diogenes believed, distracted people from the true path to virtue, a simple, natural life. The rivalry between Plato and Diogenes was more than just a clash of personalities. It was a fundamental disagreement about the role of philosophy. While Plato believed in the pursuit of higher knowledge and the ideal form, Diogenes argued that all this intellectual pursuit missed the point. To him, philosophy was not about lofty ideals, but about living a life of virtue in the here and now. Diogenes' critique didn't stop at definitions. On another occasion, Diogenes walked into Plato's home and, seeing the grand furnishings, trampled on the carpets, exclaiming, Thus I trample on Plato's vanity. To which Plato responded, yes, Diogenes, but with vanity of another kind. This exchange highlighted the ongoing tension between Diogenes' austere approach to life and Plato's more refined intellectual pursuit. Diogenes didn't just criticize wealth and power. He also demonstrated a deep disdain for social customs that, in his eyes, were arbitrary and pointless. In one notable story, Diogenes was seen in the marketplace doing his thing. And when people recoiled in horror, Diogenes remarked, if only it were as easy to relieve hunger by rubbing my stomach. And this was again his way of demonstrating that natural human impulses should not be a source of shame. For him, society's rules about modesty and behavior were just another form of control, keeping people from living freely. These stories highlight how Diogenes used his encounters with both powerful figures and everyday people to challenge their views on life, wealth, and virtue. Whether mocking philosophers, critiquing kings, or learning from children, Diogenes remained steadfast in his belief that true happiness and freedom came from rejecting societal norms and embracing a life of simplicity. Though Diogenes' lifestyle was unconventional and his methods extreme, his ideas had a profound influence on the philosophical world. Cynicism, as practiced by Diogenes, laid the groundwork for later philosophical movements and thinkers. While Diogenes himself left no writings, his actions and teachings were passed down through anecdotes, inspiring generations of philosophers who would expand on his ideas of virtue, freedom, and simplicity. One of the most immediate impacts of Diogenes' thought was on the later Cynics, particularly figures like Crates of Thebes, who adopted Diogenes' philosophy of living in accordance with nature. Crates, much like Diogenes, abandoned his wealth to live a life of poverty, wandering the streets and challenging societal norms. His teachings, in turn, influenced others, particularly his pupil Zeno of Citium, who would go on to found Stoicism, one of the most influential philosophical schools of antiquity. Stoicism, which emerged in the early 3rd century BCE, shared many core ideas with Cynicism, though it offered a more structured and systemized approach to philosophy. The Stoics, like the Cynics, believed in living in accordance with nature, but they focused on cultivating inner virtue and rationality to deal with life's challenges. The Stoic concept of apatheia, freedom from emotional disturbance, was in many ways an evolution of Diogenes' desire to free oneself from external attachments and societal pressures. While Stoicism developed its own distinct identity, Diogenes is a radical example of rejecting wealth, status, and conventional morality left an indelible mark on the movement. Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher, often wrote about the importance of simplicity and self-sufficiency, ideas that trace back to the Cynics and Diogenes himself. Even the Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius, another prominent Stoic, emphasized living with minimal desire for external goods, a concept that would have resonated with Diogenes. Beyond Stoicism, Diogenes' influence can be seen in later philosophical traditions that emphasize individual freedom and nonconformity. His radical approach to social norms inspired thinkers across centuries, from the Enlightenment to the countercultural movements of the 20th century. The idea that society's rules and expectations are arbitrary and that true freedom lies in rejecting these norms would later resonate with anarchists and freethinkers, existentialists, and even modern-day minimalists. Diogenes' ideas were particularly influential in the development of anarchists. His belief that political structures and hierarchies were unnecessary and that true freedom could only be achieved outside of organized society inspired later thinkers like Kropotkin and Leo Tolstoy. In their rejection of state authority and their focus on living simply and cooperatively, these anarchist philosophers echoed the spirit of Diogenes' cynicism. Even in the realm of existentialism, Diogenes' focus on individual freedom and authenticity can be seen as a precursor to later thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre. The existentialists, much like Diogenes, emphasized the importance of living an authentic life, free from societal expectations. While Diogenes didn't engage in existentialist theory, his refusal to conform to society's norms and his focus on individual autonomy laid the groundwork for many of the ideas that existentialists would later explore. In more recent times, the rise of minimalism as a lifestyle movement can also be traced back to Diogenes' rejection of materialism. The modern minimalist movement, which encourages people to live with less and focus on what truly matters, echoes Diogenes' belief that happiness isn't found in possessions, but in living simply and naturally. For Diogenes, having less was not a limitation, but a path to greater freedom. Diogenes' influence extends beyond philosophy into popular culture as well. His legendary wit, his extreme lifestyle, and his provocations have inspired countless stories, plays, and artistic representations over the centuries. In many ways, Diogenes has become a symbol of rebellion against authority and convention, a figure who represents the eternal struggle for individual freedom in the face of societal constraints. While Diogenes lived over 2000 years ago, his ideas continue to challenge the way we think about happiness, freedom, and what it means to live well. His refusal to conform, his critique of materialism, and his emphasis on living according to nature have left an enduring legacy, one that continues to resonate with people seeking a life of simplicity and authenticity. Diogenes' death and his legacy. As radical and rebellious as Diogenes was in life, the stories surrounding his death are just as enigmatic. Several accounts exist, each illustrating his unconventional approach to life, and even death. One version claims that Diogenes died from holding his breath, a symbolic act of self-control and rejection of the natural order. Another story suggests that he was bitten by a dog, a fitting end for someone who had lived his life in such close connections to nature and animals. And another story says that he ate an octopus. Yes. But regardless of the exact cause, Diogenes' death around 323 BCE didn't mark the end of his influence. In fact, his legacy only grew stronger with time. His students, most notably Crates of Thebes, carried on philosophy, and cynicism spread across the Greek world, inspiring countless individuals to reject materialism and embrace a life of virtue and simplicity. Diogenes' impact didn't stop with the Cynics. As we have seen, his ideas deeply influenced the Stoics, the early Christians, and even modern thinkers who sought to break free from societal conventions. But beyond his philosophical influence, Diogenes also became a symbol, a figure of rebellion, an icon of simplicity, and a living critique of human vanity. In his own time, Diogenes was often viewed as a madman, or at least as a provocateur, but with the passage of time, his life has come to represent something far more profound: the pursuit of freedom. Freedom from societal expectations, freedom from material excess, and freedom to live according to one's own principles. Diogenes' legacy can be seen in countless works of art and literature throughout the centuries. From painting and sculptures to plays and philosophical treatises, his image, often depicted with his iconic lantern, has become a timeless representation of the quest for truth and honesty. Diogenes' search for an honest man resonates with audiences today just as it did in ancient Greece. And though Diogenes may not have cared about his reputation in life, his legacy endures. He remains a figure who challenges us to question the value we place on wealth, power, and social status. He reminds us that true happiness and freedom come not from the approval of others, but from living in accordance with our nature, unburdened by the constraint of societies. In the end, Diogenes lived and died according to his own rules, challenging the conventions of his time and rejecting the comforts that most people strive for. His life may seem extreme, even absurd to modern eyes, but there is a deeper message in his rejection of materialism and social expectations. Diogenes' philosophy invites us to consider what truly matters in life and to question the values we often take for granted. As we look back on his legacy, Diogenes teaches us that freedom, happiness, and virtue are not found in wealth, possessions, or the approval of others. They are found in the courage to live authentically, to embrace simplicity, to challenge societal norms, and to seek truth in the most unexpected places. In a world obsessed with status and material success, Diogenes' radical message is as relevant today as it was over 2000 years ago. So, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this, my very non-professional way of delivering this message, and my English is not the best, so I'm sorry for that, but I will try to be a little bit more like Diogenes and say that I don't care. In a way, I do care because I would like to give you the best possible experience, but on the other hand, my time is limited, so I just like to write and read these stories. I plan on doing something more in the future, talking more about Diogenes, how to be a little bit more like Diogenes in a way of living a freer life. And I will go over some books because I have found some interesting ideas and interesting stories about him. But at this time, I'm happy that you have been with me. I hope that we have connected in a non-material and maybe a little bit mystical way, even though Diogenes didn't like mysticism very much. I do like it. I'm very intrigued by mysticism, whether it is true or not, but on the other hand, I love the ideas of Diogenes, his freedom, especially the freedom from societal norms. I love that. And it was nice to be with you. I really do. I'm really happy to have been with you. So until next time, I wish you all the best.